Hello and a very warm welcome back to Hugh's Nursery, and also the first video in a series of videos that I'm launching this week to celebrate the book launch of Veg in One Bed, which is my first ever book. And it's all about, and the clue's in the title, it's all about how to grow a load of food in a single raised bed. And I thought, what's a better way to kick off this series of videos than creating a video which is the complete guide of making your first ever raised bed. So that's exactly what we're going to do in today's video. When you create your first raised bed, you've got to make sure that the location of it is right, whether it's in your allotment or in your garden. No matter what size garden you have, you've got to put it basically in the sunniest part. So this is a corner of the garden, which at the moment is a bit shaded because it's earlier on in the morning in early March and the sun is actually rising over there in the east. But I know that very soon this will all be coated in sunlight because south is behind me. So step one is to make sure that your location is south facing. The other thing that you've got to be aware of is to make sure that it isn't in a very exposed location where winds can just rip through. So just make sure that there's a bank or a hedge there to protect your raised bed. The next thing when making your first raised bed is just to think about size. So you might have a tiny garden and you may only be able to fit a 4 by 4 foot raised bed, and the different measurements will be down in the video description so you can convert to whichever works for you. But I feel if you have a big enough space, even if it is quite a small back garden, the ideal raised bed size, like I use in my book, so if you make a raised bed this size, you can follow the book no problem, but the ideal size, in my opinion, is for it to be 4 foot wide by 10 foot long. The first thing about being 4 foot wide is that very easily on either side you can just reach in with your hands and you don't need to worry about stepping on the bed. And the second thing is being 10 foot long is if a bed is too long, you may want to cheat if you want to get to the other side just by hopping over the top. I think the sweet spot is 4 by 10 foot, and to ideally have a raised bed which is a foot high. One of the fantastic things about growing in raised beds is that it doesn't matter what kind of ground you have. It may even be concrete, but the thing about a raised bed is that you raise the level of the soil. So even if there's no soil there anyway, you can just put a bed with a foot of soil and compost and you're good to go. A raised bed is also a fantastic growing area because it has defined boundaries and measurements, which makes planting, harvesting and maintaining all the more easy. Once you've found the ideal location and also have a better understanding about the size of raised beds you want to build, you've just got to make sure that the area is cleared. So before we had different plants here growing, so I just had to clear these out. But even if you have a lawn, you don't really actually need to worry about cutting the grass or anything. You can build a raised bed directly onto the lawn. I'm building this video's raised bed out of 100% recycled plastic from a company I recommend called British Recycled Plastic. The boards don't leach any chemicals and they could last up to 100 years, and the method of putting these together is basically the same with any wooden raised bed. Because the boards I'm using are about 15 centimeters high, that's enough depth for shallow rooted vegetables like salad leaves or beetroot. But if I want to grow things like leeks or potatoes, then ideally I'd like it to be about a foot deep. So what I'm going to actually do is to put one board on top of this, so it's going to be 2 levels. When it comes to the length of screws you want to use, what you need to do is to measure the diameter of the boards and roughly double it. So I'm using stainless steel screws which are 7.5 millimeters long. And the reason why I like to use stainless steel screws is because they last so long, and if you're wanting to move garden or allotment, then what you can easily do is to remove the screws easily from the material, and then you can move the whole bed like a flat pack to its new location. After cutting the boards to size, I like to place them on the sides they're going to be built. And I always like to have the end pieces to be sandwiched at the top by the 2 long pieces to make the bed exactly 4 foot wide. Now pilot and drill at least 2 screws into both ends. So start by making a pilot hole, which is a bit that's slightly smaller diameter than the screw, just to help it along as you screw it in, and then you may need to finish it off by hand. A really quick tip when making a raised bed is to always have 2 drills. So one drill, this one, is always going to be using the bit to make pilot holes, and this one is always going to screw the screws in. Another quick tip I want to give you is that it's always easier to build a raised bed as a two-person job, which is why in some of the footage you'll see me working actually with my dad. It just makes the whole process a lot easier and a lot more efficient. But as I'm sharing with you today, it can be done as a one-man job as well. Now, after you've attached or capped one end of the bed, repeat the same steps for the opposite end and you will have completed the first section. For beds which are 2 layers like this one, you just do exactly the same by creating a whole extra layer on top. And I find this a lot easier because the boards are a lot more level than the ground I started with. Once you've created the 1 or 2 layers that your raised bed needs, there are 2 things that you need to do. The first thing is to have a look and just make sure that it's level. Now I can see it's slightly higher on the left hand side, so I'm just going to go with a spade and kind of dig in a bit underneath just to level it out. And then the second thing is to consider using corner and support posts. Now, unless you're just using 1 layer and it's really thick, strong material, what you want to do is actually attach it to the ground and to put support posts on the long sides just to avoid them bending outwards over the weight of the soil. We have found that using a point and chisel crowbar is the best way to make the pilot holes in the ground for the supports. And if you don't have one of these, then a big hammer will still do the job as long as the base of the support post is nicely pointed. Start with the corners to secure by hammering in the support post into the pilot hole, and you may need a couple of attempts to do this in case you hit a stone in the ground. If your ground is really hard and it's too hard to knock in support posts, for example you have concrete or something, then what you can do instead is to actually put a layer or a board on the inside, like what I did with my pallet raised beds. Because the ground was too hard for the support posts, I just put boards on the inside and screwed them in, and it really did hold the bed together really effectively. Now for each board, screw at least 1 screw per board into the corner post. Try and have at least 1 support post lengthways, but aim for 2 if you have a 10-foot long bed. If it's 4 foot long or even 6 foot long, you should probably be able to get away with it just with corner posts. Measure the length of the bed and divide it by 3, and this will give you an accurate spacing for the post. So for this 10-foot bed, dividing by 3, every 3 foot and 4 inches along the long end, there should be a support post. Install the support posts just like the corner posts, but these don't have to be as big in diameter as the corner posts. So for the corner posts, I'm using 2x2s, so this is 2 inches by 2 inches, and then the support posts are 1.5 by 1.5. And another thing that you need to do is just to make sure that the support and corner posts are longer than how high the raised bed is, but also what we're going to try and do is knock this down below the level of the raised bed. So anywhere from 1.5 to 2 foot, so 40 to 50 centimeters or something like that. Even if you can get down to 60 centimeters, that'll be enough. And here we have the finished raised bed, but the next stage is, what do we fill it with? A common question I get from people who are building a raised bed on top of a lawn is, can they cover it, or do they need to cover the grass before they put soil on top? So what I'd say is, if your bed is going to be over 15 centimeters deep, then there's no need to smother the grass, because that amount of soil is just going to kill off all of the grass. Now, if you're going for a raised bed which is quite shallow, then yes, I would probably just cover it with a couple of sheets of cardboard, but that's about it. There are 2 ways which I like to fill a raised bed. The first one is to use a 50-50 mix of 50% topsoil, 50% compost, mix it all together, and then you're good to go. Now, the compost is usually the most expensive material. So what I usually do is just use some cheap topsoil on the base, and then make sure that I have a 5 to 7 centimeters, so about 2 to 3 inch depth of compost on the top. Now, if the area around your raised bed is just grass or mud like it is here, then instead of trying to slip over all the time when it rains like it is now, what you can actually do, and this is what I'm doing, and I'm going to take it all the way around the raised bed, is just put down a couple of bits of cardboard and then cover it with some kind of wood chip or a bark mulch, and it just makes it look really nice and tidy. Now you've made your first raised bed, it's all about the next step. So tomorrow's video, to celebrate Veg in One Bed, my book launch this week, in fact today it's coming out, which was really exciting, I've got a video which is all about the 7 steps to success for your first ever raised bed. So check that out, make sure you get the book, because the book is the stepping stone between growing a few things in some containers and pots to having a fully sized allotment or back garden. It gives you all the skills that you need to make that transition onto larger scale growing. And finally, if you're free at 3 p.m. UK time this Sunday, Sunday the 10th of March, then join me for my first ever live stream on this channel, and we can do a load of Q&As and hopefully it'll be good fun. So hopefully I'll see you there.